If the mountain gives you only one chance, make sure everyone remembers who took it. The helicopter's rotors carved through the icy air before fading into the endless silence of the mountains. Snow drifted across the landing zone, erasing footprints almost as quickly as they appeared. The forward operating base sat high above Raven Pass, surrounded by jagged cliffs that looked ancient enough to remember every battle ever fought beneath them. Today's mission should have been routine. Escort a humanitarian convoy through the mountain pass. Reach the next outpost before sunset. Return before another winter storm closed the roads. At least that was what the briefing said. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in courage and respect, hit like and subscribe. These stories inspire change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Emily Carter. Staff Sergeant Emily Carter stepped down from the helicopter carrying a long black rifle case in one hand and a weatherproof rucksack in the other. She was dressed in white winter camouflage that blended naturally with the snow-covered terrain. A few loose strands of blonde hair escaped beneath her helmet before disappearing into the cold mountain wind. Her expression never changed. She wasn't arriving to impress anyone. She was arriving to do her job. Across the landing zone, Alpha Team prepared their equipment with the relaxed confidence of veterans. They joked while checking magazines, tightened slings across their rifles, and exchanged quick remarks about the weather. None of them looked twice at the woman crossing the snow toward the operations tent. Inside, a satellite map of Raven Pass covered the briefing table. Chief Petty Officer Mason Brooks stood beside it with folded arms. Tall. Broad-shouldered. A combat veteran whose reputation had been built across years of difficult deployments. The operations officer pointed toward Emily. Staff Sergeant Carter will provide overwatch for your movement through Raven Pass. Emily placed her rifle case beside the table without interrupting. Brooks barely glanced at her personnel file before closing. No. The room fell quiet. The operations officer frowned. No. Brooks looked directly at Emily for the first time. We're not bringing a sniper we don't know into a narrow mountain operation. She isn't moving with your team, the officer replied. She'll be covering your advance from the northern ridge. Brooks shrugged. Screw her. The words landed heavily inside the small briefing room. She can stay on the mountain if she wants. One of the younger SEAL operators chuckled. Another looked down, pretending not to react. Emily remained perfectly still. Not offended. Not surprised. She had heard worse. The operations officer tried once more. Chief, this assignment came directly from command. Brooks picked up his rifle. Command writes plans. He looked toward the door. I keep my people alive. Without waiting for another response, he motioned for Alpha Team to follow him outside. The conversation was over. Emily quietly opened the rifle case. Inside rested a meticulously maintained Barrett Murray, every component secured in perfect order. She ran one gloved hand across the receiver before locking the rifle back inside. Outside, Alpha Team climbed into waiting vehicles. Brooks gave the signal to move. Emily watched them disappear toward the entrance of Raven Pass before lifting her rucksack onto her shoulders. She wasn't following them. She was climbing higher. Toward the northern ridge. Toward the only place where the entire valley could be seen. The wind grew stronger with every step. Snow crunched beneath her boots. Far below, the convoy became smaller against the white landscape. Emily stopped once and looked across the distant mountains. A flock of birds suddenly burst into the sky from the western cliffs. They weren't flying away from the convoy. They were fleeing from something hidden beyond it. Emily's calm blue eyes narrowed for the first time that morning. Without saying a word, she continued climbing toward the overwatch position. The mountain had already begun revealing a story that no one else was listening to. The climb grew steeper with every 100 feet. Staff Sergeant Emily Carter never looked back. The convoy had already disappeared. Beneath the towering walls of Raven Pass, its engines reduced to a faint vibration carried upward by the cold morning wind. Ahead of her, the northern ridgeline stretched like the spine of a sleeping giant, offering the only position from which the entire valley could be observed. It was exactly where she had expected to be. Alone. She reached the summit just as the first rays of sunlight touched the highest peaks. Without wasting a single motion, she lowered her rucksack and began preparing her firing position. The Barrett Maradi came out first. Bipod extended. Scope mounted. Suppressor secured. A compact weather station appeared beside the rifle, followed by a laser rangefinder and a waterproof notebook already filled with handwritten ballistic data. Everything had its place. Everything served a purpose. Emily lay behind the rifle, allowing it to settle naturally into the frozen ground. She didn't force the weapon into position. She let the mountain accept it. Far below, Alpha Team entered the western approach to Raven Pass. Through the optic, each operator appeared no larger than a fingertip. Chief Mason Brooks walked near the front, occasionally turning to check the spacing between the vehicles. His movements projected complete confidence. The operation was unfolding exactly as he had planned. Emily slowly swept the ridgeline beyond the convoy. Not the road. Never the road. Experienced snipers watched where the threat would come from, not where the friendlies already were. The valley seemed strangely quiet. No distant bird calls. No mountain goats crossing exposed rock. Even the wind felt uneven, flowing smoothly through one section of the pass before suddenly changing direction along another. She frowned slightly. Nature rarely became this silent without a reason. Her binoculars paused on a distant cliff. A tiny flash. Gone. It lasted less than a second. Most people would have dismissed it as sunlight striking ice. Emily marked the location inside her notebook. Possible optical reflection. No assumptions. Only evidence. Minutes later, another detail caught her attention. A cluster of snow-covered rocks overlooking the narrowest part of the pass. Perfect. Concealment. Perfect field of fire. Too perfect. She measured the distance. Recorded the elevation. Then pressed the transmit button. Overwatch to Alpha Team. Static. She tried again. Possible observation point overlooking the choke point. Recommend increased caution. No answer. She checked the radio settings. Everything was functioning normally. Only then did she realize what had happened. Brooks had removed her from the active communications net before leaving the base. Emily lowered the handset without frustration. She had expected resistance. She hadn't expected complete silence. Below, the convoy continued toward the narrow bend where the cliffs closed tightly around the road. Inside the scope, Brooks smiled at something one of his operators said. No one looked toward the ridgeline. No one knew she was still watching. Emily shifted the rifle a fraction to compensate for a subtle crosswind moving through the valley. Then she noticed something else. A flock of birds suddenly erupted from the eastern cliff, circling wildly before vanishing into the clouds. They weren't escaping the convoy. They were escaping something waiting above it. Emily's blue eyes narrowed. Slowly, deliberately, she chambered a single round. The metallic click disappeared into the endless silence of the mountain. Somewhere beyond the next ridge, someone else had already taken position. And unlike Alpha Team, Emily Carter had begun listening to everything the mountain was trying to say. Sometimes the deadliest trap is the one that looks completely empty. Emily Carter remained motionless behind the Barrett Maradi, her breathing slow enough that even the drifting snow settling across her sleeves barely moved. The mountain had become silent again. Too silent. She swept the scope across the valley for the third time. Nothing. Then she stopped. Near the narrowest bend of Raven Pass, a thin line crossed the snow where no natural shadow should have existed. It disappeared beneath a cluster of rocks before reappearing on the opposite side of the road. A wire. Almost invisible. Emily reached for her laser rangefinder. Distance confirmed. The wire stretched directly across the convoy's route. Her eyes followed it uphill until it vanished beneath a pile of carefully arranged stones. Command wire. Manually triggered. Not abandoned. Waiting. She lifted the radio again. Alpha Team, this is Overwatch. Possible command detonated explosive at the first choke point. Recommend immediate halt. Only static answered. She tried another frequency. Nothing. Brooks had completely removed her from every operational channel. Emily lowered the handset without a word. Anger wouldn't help them. Observation might. Far below, the convoy rolled steadily toward the bend. The lead vehicle slowed slightly as the road narrowed between towering cliffs. Exactly where an ambush would begin. Emily shifted her attention higher. A dark opening appeared beneath an overhanging rock nearly 2,000 meters beyond the convoy. Not a cave. A firing position. She adjusted the magnification. The shape resolved itself. Sandbags. Snow netting. A machine gun barrel barely protruding through the camouflage. She marked it. Then continued scanning. A second position emerged farther east. Higher. Smaller. Perfect for a sniper. A faint glimmer flashed across the optic once before disappearing. Emily wrote another note. Possible sniper hide. The pieces no longer appeared random. They fit together. Machine gun to pin the convoy. Sniper to eliminate leadership. Explosive to stop movement. The valley wasn't simply dangerous. It had been designed. She looked beyond the ambush positions. Halfway up the western slope stood a weathered pine tree, its branches heavy with snow. Everything around it looked untouched. Except one patch. A section of white snow appeared slightly darker than the rest. Freshly disturbed. Someone had recently buried something there. A supply cache. Or another firing position. Emily slowly exhaled. This wasn't a small insurgent attack. Someone had spent days preparing Raven Pass. Below, Chief Mason Brooks stepped out of the lead vehicle to inspect the narrowing road. He glanced briefly toward the ridgeline, but his eyes passed over Emily's position without recognizing it. One of the younger SEAL operators laughed and pointed toward the cliffs, making a joke that disappeared into the wind. None of them noticed the machine gun hidden above. None of them saw the sniper nest waiting farther east. None of them knew a trigger wire lay beneath the snow only yards ahead. Emily chambered another round. The metallic sound seemed impossibly loud inside the silence surrounding her. She adjusted the rifle toward the highest ridgeline instead of the road. Ambushes always had a center. Someone was commanding every position below. She simply hadn't found him yet. Then, through a narrow gap between two frozen boulders, she caught the smallest movement of the morning. A gloved hand lowered a pair of binoculars. Only for a heartbeat. Then it disappeared again. Emily never blinked. At that exact moment, the lead convoy vehicle rolled over the hidden wire. Far above the valley, Emily whispered to herself. "You're 1 second too late." The mountain erupted before anyone had time to breathe. A violent explosion tore through the narrow road beneath the lead vehicle, sending snow, rock, and twisted steel high into the freezing air. The blast echoed from cliff to cliff until the entire valley seemed to shake beneath it. Emily Carter never flinched. She had been expecting the first explosion. She had hoped she was wrong. Chunks of ice rained across the convoy as the lead vehicle slammed sideways against the rock wall. The second truck locked its brakes too late, skidding into the wreckage while operators scrambled for cover. Then the machine guns opened fire. Bright flashes burst from the concealed bunker Emily had marked minutes earlier. Heavy rounds hammered into the frozen roadway, forcing Alpha Team behind scattered boulders. Snow exploded around them with every impact. A heartbeat later, the first sniper fired. One precise shot shattered the windshield of the rear vehicle. The driver ducked instinctively as glass sprayed across the cab. Chaos spread through Raven Pass. Contact left. Machine gun. Take cover. The radio traffic, once calm and organized, dissolved into overlapping voices. Chief Mason Brooks dragged one of his operators behind a rock just as another burst struck the position they had occupied seconds earlier. He scanned the cliffs. Nothing. The enemy had vanished between each volley. Exactly as they had planned. High above the battlefield, Emily adjusted her scope. No panic. No wasted movement. Only observation. The machine gun nest remained active. Its muzzle flashes appeared every few seconds from beneath the snow netting. She shifted farther east. The sniper hide. Empty. The shooter had already relocated. Professional. Her eyes continued climbing the western ridgeline until they stopped at the narrow gap between two boulders. There. The same gloved hand. Now holding binoculars instead. A radio antenna briefly appeared beside it. Emily's breathing slowed even further. Not the sniper. Not the machine gun. Command. The entire ambush flowed through that position. Below, Brooks keyed every available frequency. Where's our air support? Static. Find those guns. Another explosion interrupted him. A rocket slammed into the disabled lead vehicle, sending black smoke rolling upward through the valley. One SEAL stumbled into the open while helping a wounded teammate. The hidden sniper fired again. The round struck the rock inches from Brooks' shoulder, showering him with fragments. For the first time that morning, hesitation crossed his face. This wasn't an ordinary ambush. Someone above was directing every movement with deliberate precision. Emily measured the distance to the command position. 3,000. 100. 3,200. 47 meters. She checked the weather station beside her rifle. The crosswind had strengthened. Not enough to stop the shot. Enough to punish even the smallest mistake. She opened her waterproof notebook. The ballistic data was already there. Every elevation. Every density altitude. Every correction she had prepared before the mission began. She confirmed the firing solution one final time. Then she settled naturally behind the Barrett. Far below, Alpha Team continued fighting for survival, unaware that their last chance wasn't inside the pass. It was lying alone on a frozen ridge nearly 2 miles away. Chief Brooks looked toward the mountains as another burst of machine gun fire pinned his team behind cover. His radio crackled. Not through the command net. Through the emergency backup frequency he had forgotten still existed. A calm voice finally reached him. This is Overwatch. Emily's voice remained steady. I have identified the enemy command position. Brooks closed his eyes for the briefest moment. Everything she had warned him about had come true. He pressed the transmit button. His reply was quieter than anyone expected. Overwatch. A burst of gunfire forced him lower behind the rocks. When he spoke again, every trace of pride had disappeared. Guide us. Emily Carter closed her left eye. The world narrowed to glass, steel, wind, and distance. Everything outside the scope disappeared. The explosions. The shouting. The smoke climbing through Raven Pass. Even fear. Only the target remained. Her crosshair rested just below the narrow gap between two frozen boulders where the enemy commander had exposed himself for less than a second. Through the magnified optic she caught another brief movement, a shoulder, a radio handset, the edge of binoculars. Confirmation. The command position was alive. Emily glanced once at the weather station. The crosswind continued drifting across the valley. Not constant. Changing. She waited. Long-range shooting wasn't about pulling the trigger. It was about knowing when not to. Below, Alpha Team fought desperately to survive. Machine gun fire forced them deeper behind shattered rocks while another rocket slammed into the disabled convoy, throwing burning debris across the snow. Brooks grabbed the emergency radio. Overwatch, we're pinned. Emily never looked away from the scope. I know. Another pause. Then she spoke with the same calm voice. When I fire, the machine gun will hesitate. You'll have less than 10 seconds. Brooks didn't ask how she knew. Copy. Emily shifted the elevation turret one precise click. Then another. She confirmed the firing solution already written in her notebook. Range. Wind. Temperature. Density, altitude. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was guessed. She drew one slow breath. Half released it. Held the remaining air. The mountain became perfectly still. The drifting snow stopped moving. Even the wind seemed to pause. Her finger settled against the trigger. Pressure. Not a pull. A gradual increase until the rifle decided to fire on its own. The Barrett thundered across the ridge. The recoil rolled smoothly into her shoulder as the muzzle brake blasted snow outward in two white clouds. The shot vanished into the valley. Then silence. Emily never lifted her head. At this distance, the bullet needed time. Seconds stretched longer than minutes. Brooks counted without realizing it. 1. 2. 3. The enemy commander leaned farther from behind the rocks, continuing to issue orders through his radio. 4. 5. The hidden machine gun kept firing. 6. 7. The sniper searched for another target. 8. 9. Then everything changed. The commander suddenly collapsed backward, disappearing behind the rocks. His radio tumbled into the snow. At the exact same moment, the machine gun burst stopped. Not because the weapon had been destroyed. Because the gunner no longer received orders. Confusion spread across the ambush. Several enemy fighters left cover, looking toward the command position instead of the convoy. Others shouted conflicting instructions that echoed through the cliffs. Brooks recognized the hesitation instantly. Move. Alpha Team surged from behind the rocks. For the first time since the ambush began, they crossed open ground without being pinned by coordinated fire. Emily was already searching for the next threat. The eastern ridgeline. The sniper. There. A faint flash betrayed the optic for a fraction of a second. The enemy shooter had finally revealed his location. Emily tracked the movement but didn't fire. Not yet. The sniper had also heard the Barrett. Now he was hunting her. Two scopes searched opposite mountains. Two professionals. Separated by more than 3,000 meters of frozen silence. Brooks' voice returned over the emergency frequency, breathless but unmistakably different. Overwatch. He paused as Alpha Team reached stronger cover. That shot just saved every one of us. Emily remained behind the rifle, her blue eyes fixed on the distant ridgeline. Her expression never changed. The fight isn't over, she replied quietly. Then she settled the crosshair onto the only sniper still standing between Alpha Team and the road home. For 3 long seconds, the mountain held its breath. No coordinated gunfire followed. No fresh commands echoed across the cliffs. Only scattered voices drifted through the smoke as the ambush began to lose its rhythm. Emily Carter remained behind the Barrett, her cheek still resting against the stock. She did not celebrate the impossible shot. She verified it. The enemy commander lay motionless beside the fallen radio. One arm remained stretched across the snow, but no hand reached for the transmitter. Target neutralized. Without leadership, the carefully planned ambush immediately began to unravel. One machine gun resumed firing too early. Another position answered too late. The overlapping fields of fire that had trapped Alpha Team only moments before dissolved into confusion. Emily pressed the transmit button. Command eliminated. Chief Mason Brooks looked toward the western ridge where the enemy commander had disappeared. He couldn't see the body. He didn't need to. The battlefield itself was answering. Machine gun bursts became irregular. The mortar fire stopped completely. One enemy fighter broke cover and sprinted toward the command position before abruptly changing direction, unsure who was issuing orders. Brooks seized the moment. Alpha. Every operator turned instinctively. Push left. The SEALs surged forward. This time, the enemy couldn't react together. One bunker was suppressed while another remained silent, still waiting for instructions that would never come. Emily shifted her scope toward the eastern ridgeline. The remaining sniper had moved. Only a faint disturbance in the snow betrayed the new hide. Patient. Disciplined. He wasn't looking at Alpha Team anymore. He was searching the northern ridge. Searching for her. Emily remained perfectly still. A sniper duel wasn't won by shooting first. It was won by letting the other shooter believe he had found you. The enemy optic flashed once. Tiny. Barely noticeable. Enough. A split second later, a high-powered round struck the rock less than a foot from Emily's position. Stone fragments scattered across her sleeve, and a sharp piece of granite cut a thin line beneath her right eye. She didn't raise a hand. She didn't even blink. Brooks heard the distant impact through the valley. Overwatch. Emily answered calmly. Still operational. She slid only a few inches to her left, using the natural folds of the frozen ground instead of exposing herself by standing. The enemy sniper expected movement. Emily gave him almost none. She waited. The wind shifted. Snow drifted across the eastern ridge. Then the white camouflage net covering the hostile hide twitched almost imperceptibly. Not from the wind. From breathing. Emily centered the crosshair. One controlled breath. Half released. Pressure on the trigger. The Barrett roared again. Across nearly 3 kilometers of frozen air, the concealed sniper disappeared backward behind the rocks. A moment later, a precision rifle slid down the slope, tumbling through the snow before vanishing into the valley below. Emily continued watching the position. No further movement. East Ridge clear, she transmitted. Below, Brooks looked across the battlefield. Enemy resistance collapsed almost immediately. Several surviving attackers abandoned their positions and retreated into the mountains, leaving behind weapons, ammunition, and unfinished firing points. The pass was finally opening. Brooks pressed the radio once more. His voice carried none of the certainty it had held that morning. Only respect. Overwatch. Emily answered. Go ahead. He looked toward the northern ridge even though he still couldn't see her. We're moving. Emily scanned every ridgeline one final time before lowering the rifle slightly. Understood. She paused. I'll stay above you until every last man is out of the pass. No one objected. No one questioned her judgment. The woman they had left alone on the mountain had become the reason they would all leave it alive. The battle no longer sounded like an ambush. It sounded like survivors trying to escape one. Scattered gunfire echoed through Raven Pass, but the disciplined rhythm that had nearly destroyed Alpha Team was gone. Without their commander and sniper, the remaining enemy fighters broke into isolated groups, each reacting instead of coordinating. Emily Carter remained on the northern ridge, sweeping every ridgeline before allowing herself to breathe a little deeper. The mountain was finally becoming predictable again. She pressed the radio. Alpha Team, the western bunker is abandoned. Chief Mason Brooks answered immediately. Copy. No hesitation. No doubt. Only trust. Emily shifted her binoculars toward the southern slope. 3 hostile fighters were retreating through a narrow draw, carrying packs instead of weapons. Not preparing another attack. Leaving. She ignored them. Her mission was no longer to chase fleeing enemies. It was to bring every SEAL home. Brooks, she transmitted. Take your team 20 meters north. The center road is still exposed. Without questioning her, Brooks raised one hand. Move north. Alpha Team crossed exactly where Emily directed. Seconds later, several delayed rifle rounds struck the road they had just avoided. One operator looked toward Brooks. How did she know? Brooks never stopped moving. Because she's watching what we can't. The word surprised even him. Far above, Emily continued scanning through the optic. A broken stone wall overlooked the final exit from Raven Pass. Natural cover. Perfect for one last defensive position. She searched it carefully. Nothing. Then a small mirror-like reflection appeared beneath the snow. Not a rifle scope. A pair of binoculars. Someone was observing. Emily centered her crosshair but waited. The figure slowly stood, raising both empty hands before disappearing down the opposite side of the ridge. A lookout. Not an immediate threat. She let him leave. Every unnecessary shot carried unnecessary risk. Instead, she reported the movement. Observation post withdrawing. Route ahead remains clear. Brooks acknowledged with a single word. Understood. For the next 15 minutes, Emily became the eyes of the entire operation. She directed vehicle placement around damaged sections of road. She warned Alpha Team about unstable rocks loosened by the explosions. She identified safe lanes through abandoned firing positions. Every instruction arrived calmly. Every correction proved accurate. No one questioned a single transmission. Eventually, the convoy reached the eastern exit of Raven Pass. The towering cliffs that had trapped them all morning finally opened into a wide valley washed in pale winter sunlight. Brooks stopped beside the lead vehicle and looked back toward the mountains. From where he stood, the northern ridge appeared empty. He still couldn't see Emily. Only the place where she had remained alone since sunrise. He lifted the radio one more time. Overwatch. Emily answered instantly. Go ahead. Brooks removed his helmet, running one hand through sweat-damp hair despite the freezing air. His voice carried a weight none of his operators had ever heard before. You warned us. A brief silence followed. We didn't listen. Emily watched the convoy continue toward safety. Snow drifted across the ridge, slowly covering the shallow impressions left by her boots. What's important, she replied softly, is that everyone is still moving. Brooks looked around at every member of Alpha Team. Bruised. Exhausted. Alive. He understood exactly what she meant. One of the younger operators, the same man who had laughed during the briefing that morning, quietly spoke into the shared radio channel. Ma'am. He hesitated. Then finished with complete sincerity. Thank you for staying on that mountain. Emily allowed herself the smallest smile. Almost invisible. She closed the bolt on her rifle, slung it over her shoulder, and took one last look across Raven Pass. Hours earlier, it had been a place where she was told she wasn't needed. Now it stood as silent proof that respect had been earned from 3,247 meters away. The helicopter touched down just before sunset. Its rotors scattered loose snow across the landing zone as medics moved toward the arriving convoy. The battered vehicles rolled through the gate one by one, carrying operators whose uniforms were torn, smoke-stained, and dusted with frozen mud. Every man who stepped out was alive. That alone was enough to silence the base. Chief Mason Brooks climbed down last. His eyes instinctively searched the surrounding ridgelines before settling on the northern trail, leading toward the landing zone. Several minutes later, a solitary figure emerged from the fading light. Staff Sergeant Emily Carter walked down the mountain carrying the Barrett Murray across one shoulder and her weathered rucksack across the other. The thin scratch beneath her right eye had dried into a narrow crimson line, but her pace never changed. She looked less like someone returning from a victory, more like someone finishing another ordinary day. The younger SEAL who had laughed during the morning briefing watched her approach. He quietly removed his gloves. Then, without a word, stepped aside to clear her path. Others followed. No one had ordered them to. Respect no longer required instructions. Inside the operations center, technicians were already reviewing surveillance footage collected by an unmanned reconnaissance aircraft that had entered the area shortly after the ambush began. The large monitor displayed the winding length of Raven Pass from thousands of feet above. Frame by frame, the analysts reconstructed the battle. The explosion. The machine gun positions. The collapsing command post. Finally, they reached the moment that changed everything. A timestamp appeared in the corner of the screen. Far beyond the convoy, almost impossible to notice without magnification, a tiny flash appeared on the northern ridge. 8 long seconds later, the enemy commander collapsed. Silence filled the room. One intelligence officer slowly lowered his headset. 3,247 meters. Another analyst replayed the sequence. Same result. Again. Same result. No one questioned it anymore. The impossible shot had happened exactly as recorded. Brooks stood motionless, watching the screen. The operations officer stepped beside him. "You almost left your overwatch behind." Brooks didn't answer immediately. There was nothing to defend. Nothing to explain. Only a mistake he now understood completely. Outside, Emily sat alone on a wooden maintenance bench. She carefully unloaded the Barrett, wiped melting snow from the receiver, and inspected the scope for damage. Every movement remained slow. Methodical. Professional. The rifle had done exactly what it was designed to do. A pair of boots stopped in front of her. Emily looked up. Chief Mason Brooks stood silently for a moment before removing his tactical gloves. He extended one hand. Not as a superior. Not as a commander. As one professional to another. "I was wrong." Emily looked at his hand for a brief second before shaking it firmly. Neither of them smiled. Neither of them needed to. Brooks continued quietly. "When you warned us." He paused. "I thought experience made me right." Emily released his hand. "Experience matters." She closed the rifle case with a soft click. "So does listening." Brooks nodded once. No excuses. No arguments. Only acceptance. As Emily stood to leave, the young SEAL who had laughed that morning approached nervously. He hesitated before speaking. "Ma'am." She turned. "I'm sorry." Emily studied his face for a moment. Then answered with the same calm voice that had guided them through the mountain. "Learn from today." She lifted the rifle case and walked toward the barracks without another word. Behind her, Brooks watched until she disappeared through the doorway. The mountain had measured every operator that day. Only one had seen the entire battlefield before the first shot was ever fired. 3 weeks later, fresh snow covered Raven Pass as if the battle had never happened. The mountain had erased the craters. The smoke. The footprints. Even the blood. Nature had reclaimed everything. Everything except the lesson. At the forward operating base, a new rotation of SEAL operators gathered for their first mountain briefing. Young faces studied the topographic map while instructors explained the dangers hidden inside the narrow valley. Avalanches. Crosswinds. Limited visibility. Then an instructor pointed toward a satellite image of the northern ridgeline. This position, he said quietly, saved an entire team. No names followed. No dramatic speech. Only a single photograph taken from a reconnaissance drone. A lone firing position overlooking the pass. One rifle. One shooter. One impossible angle. Among the new arrivals, a young recruit raised his hand. Who was up there? The instructor smiled faintly. You'll probably meet her. The classroom fell silent. Outside, Staff Sergeant Emily Carter sat alone at the long-range qualification range, replacing the worn data card inside her ballistic notebook. The thin scar beneath her right eye had nearly disappeared. Nothing else about her had changed. She still checked every screw on the rifle before every session. Still recorded the wind by hand. Still trusted preparation more than confidence. Chief Mason Brooks approached carrying 2 mugs of hot coffee. Without speaking, he placed one beside her. Emily accepted it with a nod. For a few moments they simply watched snow drift across the distant peaks. Finally, Brooks broke the silence. I've been thinking about that morning. Emily looked toward the mountains. So have I. He smiled slightly. I used to think leadership meant having all the answers. She remained quiet. Brooks continued. Turns out. He looked toward the same ridgeline where she had fought alone. Sometimes leadership means listening to the person who sees farther than you do. Emily took a slow sip of coffee. The mountain doesn't care about rank. Brooks gave a quiet laugh. No. It doesn't. Just then, a convoy rolled into the base carrying another incoming unit. Several operators stepped out, talking loudly until one of them noticed Emily cleaning her barrett at the edge of the range. He stopped. So that's her. Another operator followed his gaze. The sniper. Brooks answered before Emily could. No. The younger men looked confused. Brooks smiled. That's the reason we're all still here. The conversation ended there. Emily closed the rifle case with the same gentle click that had echoed through the briefing room weeks before. As she walked toward the armory, the young operators instinctively stepped aside, creating a clear path without anyone asking them to. Not because of her rank. Not because of rumors. Because respect had already reached them before she had. Emily never looked left or right. She simply kept walking. Behind her, Raven Pass stood silent beneath another blanket of snow. It no longer remembered the explosion. Or the ambush. Or the fear. But every operator who had survived that day carried the memory forward. Some stories are written in reports. Some are carved into medals. And a rare few are measured only by the lives that continue because one person refused to stop watching. On the morning she was told, "Screw her," Emily Carter answered with silence. On the mountain, she answered with skill. And from 3,247 meters away, she proved a truth every soldier would carry long after the snow had melted. Respect is never demanded. It is earned.